I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Changes to the agenda.
Mr. Mayor, the council will note that there's a revised agenda. Under general business, we've added a discussion regarding the acquisition of 261 Main Street. And then under engineering, in addition to preserving pond and wetland buffers, Rich is just going to give a council an update on the 2019 road improvement project based on new information, discussions, and what came out of the Streets Expo earlier this week.
Motion to approve the amended agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Could you ask council to turn on their microphones, please?
We were on it.
Oh, that's right. I didn't see this one hidden here.
Oh,
I haven't turned that one on.
Okay, we have a presentation for our former Planning Commission Chair, Steve Thompson. On behalf of the City of Elko New Market and the City of Elko New Market City Council, I would like to recognize Steve Thompson for his dedication and service to the community. Steve was appointed in 2005 to serve on the New Market Planning Commission and continued to serve on the Planning Commission after the merger of Elko and New Market. For the last several years, Steve has served as a Planning Commission Chair. Steve experienced baptism by fire working on finishing the 2005 joint Southeast Scott County Comprehensive Plan, revising the City of New Market zoning ordinance, developing the joint zoning ordinance for the City of Elko New Market, and serving through most of the development in the city's history. All in his first few years on the commission. Through the years of Steve's service, Steve's calm, steady approach, knowledge of the city's zoning code have contributed greatly to the sound recommendations by the Planning Commission to the City Council. Steve's experience and perspective will be missed. On behalf of the City Council, I would like to thank Steve for his nearly 15 years of service to the citizens of Elko New Market. Public comment is closed. Consent agenda. Anything anybody want to poll or?
I don't have anything to pull. I did have just a question on a couple items in the auto pays for the registry. For the register. Just there was 3 different line items all labeled vendor liability. One was for para, one was Minnesota Department of Revenue, and the other one was to the Internal Revenue Service. In total, it's about 17 grand approximately. Just curious what a vendor liability payment would be to those.
That's the payroll for the employees, the para, the federal, and the state.
So it's just the payroll taxes.
That's just payroll taxes, yep.
Just curious. That's all I had.
Motion.
Okay.
Motion to approve the consent agenda. Second.
Kate whispered second.
Sorry.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. No public hearings. General business.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, the first item under general business is a discussion regarding attachment of previously annexed property. Renee will be giving a presentation on this item.
Painted lights on.
Okay. I attended a township board meeting on September 4th of this year to request cooperation with annexation petition that the city had received. I think attending a township board meeting always leads to a lot of questions for probably council and staff that attend those meetings. There were a lot of questions, and one of the questions that came up, and some board members may be more concerned than others, about properties that had been annexed into the city that had never been developed. So I committed to the township board that I would bring this to the council's attention, their concern, and so I've created a map that identifies the properties that had been annexed into the city and proposed for development prior to the recession. Many of them had gotten through the preliminary plat process, some even through final plat and then never filed. I did explain to the township board at the time that they were all really a result of the recession, that the developers abandoned the project. I think when I came back and discussed it with Tom, we did feel that it was worth having a discussion to see if the council felt detachment of the properties would be appropriate or should be considered. Also, in discussing it with the city attorney, I think her recommendation is that any detachment should be by petition of the property owner. Certainly there should be stakeholder input, and property owner is probably the most important. I also would like to point out that as developers come to the city, these are the areas that are the first that we go to market the city or market potential residential development, because we know the issues related to utilities and streets, and the city's already been down that road. So I guess with that, I'll open it up for discussion.
So we're not looking for the council to say should or shouldn't. We're simply looking for direction from the council if this is something we should look at further, and if so, we're recommending that you send it to the planning commission for that analysis and recommendation.
I strongly feel that we don't need to send this anywhere and leave it as it is.
Well, in reading it, I see a lot of developers are still looking at this. We're sending developers to them. The only piece of property, the one I saw, is the Sequoia property down in the southwest part of the city. But till they petition to leave the city, I don't think it's something we even need to look at. I mean, if somebody petitions to leave the city, it's just like somebody petitioning to get into the city.
And you're referring to the number 4, right?
That'd be number 2.
Number 2? Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, number 2.
So, on that particular property, there's 3 different, I just want to understand that a little bit better. So there's 3 different parties that own it, and...
That's correct. Pre-recession, the developer at the time had an agreement with the Sikora family to take down, or had options on the property. Some of it was actually purchased and closed on, and the rest still remains under the ownership of either the Sikora family or Sikora Trust. So 2 of the entities are essentially the Sikoras, and the developer at the time lost the property to foreclosure. A new investor has picked it up. The new investor has been in pretty close communications with the city over the last 6 to 8 months about possible development. Rich and I have met with contractors and an engineer working on behalf of that developer to see if a project could be put together on that particular piece. So yeah, that number 2 really does consist of 3 property owners.
So how does it work with one of the parties not wanting to, or having no intention of developing or selling?
They're separate properties. They have separate.
They're separate PIDs or completely
Yeah,
separate?
you wouldn't need to do, it wouldn't be an all or nothing.
It could be.
Portion
Okay.
would go back. We know from discussions with the Sikora family, at this point, they have no desire to sell the property for development.
And then when we've done these annexations in the past, was there any commitment made by the city that a development was going to happen, or that, did we obligate ourselves to something?
No, it was done with the understanding, the practice and position of the city at the time that these subject properties were developed is that they were being annexed with the intent that they were going to be developed at urban densities. And there were petitions by property owners and active developments that we needed to annex it for so we could process them. All of them have received to one degree or another development approval, but in all cases, with the exception of number 3, the Mahola property, but that came in with the farm. So a portion of the property that was annexed at the time was developed. But the other three, they came in, they were all at various stages of approval and the development process when the recession hit, up to including moving dirt on the Pheasant Hills portion.
So there was no obligation at that time that the city made and committed to?
No.
And we paid, I'm assuming the city had paid a fee to the township?
There are little differences with each one as to how they came in, and I'd have to defer to Renee. She's most recently looked at those. I mean, some of these
Yeah,
were
they-
over a decade ago. My memory's a little fuzzy, but usually there was either a tax, some sort of a tax ramp down or a fee that was paid. So the township did receive some offset at the time.
That's where I was going.
Yeah.
So in each case, the township did receive some compensation in some way, shape, or form from the city.
They were all a
Yes.
ramp down.
They were all ramped down. That was the common practice at the time. I just couldn't.
Yeah.
Which is fine. That was all I wanted to clarify.
Well, and I think it goes back to what Andrea said too, or you alluded to what you said. I mean, if the property owners aren't petitioning for it, I think we're talking about nothing here. Just like we can't go say we want to take that property and that property and that property as a city, we would have to go through the normal process, so. I mean, I think it doesn't matter.
Would it be fair to say, though, that, so is the reverse true, that if the property owners were interested in seeking detachment, we would be receptive to the discussion?
What's the process? I mean, can I ask for detachment of my property from city limits if I petitioned for it?
You,
I mean, seriously, we could.
but you would have to look at the what you're saying is what I'm hearing is we don't want to spend the time looking at it until we actually have a request.
Right.
Because even if, we're not saying we should as staff, but we would need to look at factors such as, have we made an investment in infrastructure to facilitate the development after that? What are the interests of the property owner? Should it be detached if the property wants to remain in the city limits? My best understanding based on past discussions with property owners, 3 out of those 4 would absolutely want to stay in the city limits because it would facilitate the development of the property that they're actively or have indicated in the past they want to sell for development.
Which, I don't question any of that. I'm thinking in lines of just good faith negotiations with the township on future developments, on future annexations. Did you get a read from the township that this was kind of a...
To piggyback on that, is this something where you got some old school people back on the town board and some potential old blood that they're trying to go down that path?
I like the way John said it better.
I mean, that's what it feels like. It feels like there's something that's there, now they're coming back on, and now they
Well,
want
I am not familiar with who used to be on the board because I was not involved. So I would say the individual or individuals that spoke to it, I don't know if they were on the board in the past.
I don't think, I'll be honest, I don't think it's a strange question to ask. We have informally, as staff, had some discussions in recent years about these properties that we've annexed and what do we do with them. If you recall, not that long ago, we had a discussion about whether or not we wanted to wipe all the PUDs associated with these properties clean. And at that time, the Planning Commission and Council's position was, no, we'll leave it up to the property owners what they want to do. So I think discussion, it's not strange, I think, to ask the question. But that's why we're coming to council. Do you want to spend time on it, though, if the property owners aren't interested?
But again, what was the read from the township when they brought this up?
I can address that because I've met with the township board quite a few times and individual members. And I think it's a question I think if a property owner asked, I think we would probably be more open to it than any other way. But until somebody asks, it's just like we don't actively try to pursue something in the township.
Which I
mean,
understand. But
I think it's just more a case where, since it hasn't been done, they want to know if we're open, if the property owners would want to come back to the township.
And that's kind of what I'm asking Renee. Was that the tone of the question, or was it more curiosity? How does the process work, or was it more hard feelings?
I would say it was not a consensus with all 5 members, but with 2, maybe a little hard feelings.
Okay.
Not just how would the process work, maybe just a little, I'm not going to say frustration, but those farms that are still being farmed, are agricultural, are now in the city, and
Okay,
Why? Yeah.
that's what I was asking. So.
Make a distinction too, you're talking about intent. So some of those annexations, some of the recent annexations agreements, we added language regarding detachment and detachment options. None of these had anything in there about a detachment. The other thing is that I don't believe any of these properties paid that fee that some of the townships have been requesting of developers. They did pay the tax proration, the city paid that. So if I think you'd want those property owners to know if they left, they might be subject to that when they want to come back in.
Or if we were to detach it, we may want, as part of the deal, to have an early annexation agreement on all those properties as part of the process. But that would be if the council wanted to go that direction. That would be the
Right.
type of stuff we'd look at and discuss and come back with a recommendation.
I think we could let them know we'd be open to discussions if something comes up, but until then, there's no sense for us to burden our staff into looking into it and spending the money unless they want to pay our staff for the time to look into it.
I would agree.
None of these property owners know anything about this,
That's correct.
correct?
Unless township board members talk to the staff, we haven't had these discussions, and none of these property owners have approached the city about detachment, in my recollection. So.
I think most of them like city police. And they're not always totally happy with the city, just like nobody is.
I am.
Well,
You set me up for that.
This is
I
the guy
know.
that wanted to.
I mean, there's always something. I mean, I'm totally happy, except I wish my water bills were a little less. But other than that, everybody's got something that they can say. But otherwise, I think they're generally pretty happy. So,
Consensus is just to leave it unless one of the property owners comes to us and asks about it.
and then that's when we look into it.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's pretty clear direction for us, and Renee will contact the township and relay the feedback from the council.
Thank you.
Item B.
Item B, this is a discussion regarding the acquisition of 261 Main Street. This is an item that the council has discussed in the past. We apologize for its late addition, but the timing of when the property was put on the market relative to when we became aware of it and when packet came out basically didn't allow that. So it was a late addition to the agenda, so we apologize for that.
So we have to, as Tom said, I think in late August, we brought to your attention, we became aware that this property had been in foreclosure and would likely be coming onto market soon. The area the 3 houses there along Main Street are an area that has been identified for redevelopment by the city. And the city of Elko New Market did adopt in, I think, 2012, a property acquisition policy, which really addresses this situation almost exactly. The objectives outlined in the policy, which was included in your information, was for the redevelopment of non-conforming uses and structures, blighted areas or distressed properties into higher quality developments and land uses, protection of property values, initiation and implementation of an approved redevelopment plan for Elko Town Site or downtown Elko New Market. I do have a map on the next slide, but it's important to note that this acquisition policy really just pertains to the downtown Elko New Market and then the original Elko Town Site, because those are the areas that have been identified for high-density residential commercial development. The procedure really allows for the assemblage of smaller properties into larger properties that allow the greater development on the properties. Also, property acquisition criteria located in the downtown that we already touched on that. Properties which are blighted. This property is really questionable. We have seen a deterioration of the exterior of the property and really all 3 of these properties in this area over the last 10 years. Blighted property means any property hosting buildings or structures which are in a state of deterioration, dilapidation, or decay. Properties which are below market value. properties that are vacant. Vacant buildings or structures, and non-conforming uses of properties and structures. So this is currently, this on the property today is a single-family residential home, and it has been utilized as a single-family residential home, I think as long as, forever. The last occupant of the property, I did not look into the utility bills to see exactly when they moved out, but we do believe it was just within the last couple of months. It ceased use as the single-family residential home. You can see on this slide here that the city has adopted a downtown master plan, and the box in red shows the property at 261 Main. It is identified for downtown neighborhood. It's really intended for high-density residential development, multi-story. In the master plan, there were some site layouts for like multifamily, multiple story structures on the property. The properties outlined in yellow are properties that the city already owns, and you will remember most recently, about a year ago, the city acquired property for the extension, the northerly extension of Webster, for a future road corridor. Currently, the property is a legal non-conforming use because a single-family home is not a permitted use in an R5 zoning district. The R5 zoning district really only allows multiple family dwellings containing 6 or more units. By conditional use, there can be some commercial uses integrated in with that, but not to exceed more than 50% of the main floor area of the building. Again, as Tom noted, we actually just became aware yesterday that it came on the market. Sign probably went up within the last week. I didn't notice it. I actually got a call from the real estate broker that had listed the property, and that's when I became aware of it, so that's why it was in your packet so quickly. And I know you had previously expressed an interest in at least learning more, possible pursuit of the property, so bringing this back to you for further direction as to whether you'd like staff to continue pursuing acquisition of the property.
I would say yes.
One question, I'm trying to remember what the status is of the property just to the west of it.
It's for sale for $700,000.
No, okay, how about to the east? I noticed that, yeah, I know what I was.
It's, as near as we can tell, it is vacant, has been vacant for some extended period of time, and is not currently listed for sale.
That's correct.
700.
So, well,
That's his waiver property.
and so like on that one, on the one, 251, that's listed on Edina Realty as commercial property, blah, blah, blah. And I don't know, it doesn't make a difference. I mean, can they put whatever they want there to describe it? I mean,
Well,
then the 261 is described as a residential. Blah,
well,
blah.
I mean, a real estate agent can state whatever they want on the MLS. Ideally, they would consult with the city to see what it's currently zoned, what's currently permitted, what the city's long-term plans are, and disclose that. But in terms of 261 Main, it being listed as a single-family home, I do believe that is accurate and ethical that it is listed that way because somebody has occupied the home within the last 12 months, so it's still within the grandfathering limitations. You could buy it, come in for, it does need some rehabilitation on the interior. You could pull a building permit to make those repairs, to re-side it, to re-roof it, to put new windows.
As long as I wanted to.
And you could live there for the next 80 years. That would be a right.
How long has the property sat vacant?
I'm not entirely sure, but I do believe it was occupied until fairly recently. I do need to check with Stephanie. I didn't get to do that today. You know, we can tell when the water was either turned off, when the property was taken over, or the utilities were taken over by the mortgage company. I believe it was within the last probably 4, 5, 6 months
And that
or less.
grandfather status goes from the time they left time the
Yes.
property was considered vacant.
Considered
12 months
vacant.
from there.
That's correct.
So it goes for a full
12
year
months.
from the time everybody moved out.
12 months, that's correct.
So if someone wanted to buy it, use it as a single-family house and live there, they'd have to do a bunch of improvements to make it up to code?
Yes, that's correct. It's not habitable.
Based on the pictures, it looks like there could be quite a bit.
Right, that is one.
Or I could purchase it for 110,000, hold out and see what the city will give me in a couple of years if they really wanted it. I mean, and try to leverage it that way and not even
Mhm.
do anything with it.
Or a private developer, that's
Well,
correct.
I'm thinking selfishly here.
Any change of use of the structure, so if it was going to be converted to a different use, really any change of use would be difficult without either planning commission, special approval, or if somebody wanted to use it for a commercial use that's not currently allowed through city zoning, just I'm going to say the entire main floor, and somebody wanted to convert it to an office, for instance, like Tim Sadusky's. If they even got through the zoning deviations through the planning commission council, then there's also building code requirements that they would have to bring it up to building code.
Could this be used, somebody buy it and use it just for storage in the present, or would they have to go through any zoning for that?
Yeah, just personal storage is not a permitted use in the R5 district.
So we don't have to worry, if we watch it, that it would turn into a junk house, people would just use it for storage then?
It's not permitted, personal storage is not permitted, or even, I mean, there's limits on exterior storage in all zoning districts.
So if the house remained vacant, one of the issues we've seen it with other properties that you're aware of, is we have two issues. It would be the potential for hazardous building conditions to exist. At some point, the building could be considered unsafe structurally, or have issues, or can turn it, if somebody used it for storage, or just use it to dump garbage. It could turn into a trash house, and then we'd have to look at initiating a hazardous building process. And as you know, that's a lengthy and expensive process for the city to engage in. We're not saying that will happen with this particular property, but as you can see from the staff memo, we would be recommending acquisition for the purposes of tearing down the property for the center of redevelopment.
I think it's a no-brainer. We go buy it tomorrow.
So too.
If we can get it for the right price, first, I would kind of go along with that, but I don't want to, with the cost of tearing it down, I would want to make sure that we got it reasonable enough that, because we're going to have to hold it for a long time.
Yeah, I think we're kind of all in agreement, aren't we?
So if the council's in agreement, we'd be looking for a motion to authorize staff to pursue acquisition and negotiate a purchase agreement of the property, subject to council approval.
So moved.
Second. All in favor? Aye.
Okay. We will keep the council advised as it moves, as if anything moves on this, so.
Here. Reports administration.
I have nothing specific tonight unless the council has questions for me.
Any questions? Public Works? Any questions? Police Department?
Nothing specific to add, just update the council that we are currently conducting 2 background investigations on candidates for position. And we'll keep the council apprised on how that's going.
Sounds like the police had a tough incident at a house a couple weeks back.
Yes, we did.
How is everyone doing?
The officer's doing just fine. Yep. And thank you for asking.
They had a pretty good event at Firefly Coffee too.
We have a blast. Yeah, we have. You know, I don't even know if you can call it an event now. The fun time that we had, it was a good time. We had a good turnout. It was a lot of fun. We definitely will do that again in the future.
They are very popular in their community, I will say that. Especially Josh and Melissa. Okay, fire department, no, nothing unless anybody has any questions they can pass on. Engineering?
You have two items for me. One is related to pond and wetland buffers. I don't have a presentation prepared. If you have specific questions or want to see a visual, I can bring it up. But I was thinking you'd read it carefully and have your questions all ready to go.
So what is the next step? And I guess I mean, I've read it very carefully. So are we moving forward with putting signs out, or is that?
In a nutshell, any new developments will have signs. That's already policy. The question is, do you want to go back on past ones and set signs, or leave things lie unless there's complaints or some problem comes up? I don't know that we have a strong position. I think we've looked into it a little bit as staff in the past, and the feeling was we got other stuff to do. This could get big. If, you know, it's not one property, it's a string of properties every place you go.
What you tend to see is somebody will encroach, and then it becomes, well, then the neighbor encroaches a little. So it tends to be neighborhoods or portions of neighborhoods around particular wetlands or drainage, utility ponds. And quite honestly, we don't believe it's a rampant issue in the community as far as a problem, but it does occur. We know it does occur.
Yeah. Actually, preparation of this memo gave us occasion to actually lay easements on top of aerial photos, which we hadn't done before. And it took us a little time to find some to put in the memo, to be honest with you. So, may not be, I mean, they're out there, but it's nothing.
Are there, I mean, I looked through all the maps and such. Are there any areas that you see that were particularly bad or really big encroachments?
Well, where it occurs is they typically mow right down to the water line, or they'll
take the weed whacker and
or
knock it
they'll
all
dump
down.
their materials. A lot of some of that is easy. Some is more visible in aerial photos than others. But again, it's not rampant. And in the past, we've responded on when it's come to our attention and there's more significant issues, or the neighbors call in. We've gone out and investigated. We've done enforcement actions at that time. But this is the type of thing that does tend to demand a lot of resources, or we anticipate it will if we want to go retroactively. And so really, it's just, quite honestly, it's a policy decision on use of resources.
I think there's a better use of resources.
Is there anything from the state perspective that we can get in trouble for not enforcing this kind of stuff? You know, with all the new stuff being passed down regulation-wise, that they could say, hey, we knew about this, we didn't do anything about it as a city?
Not that I could find.
And part of it is the new about it part. We're not actively going out and inspecting it for it. So if we came across something that was egregious as part of our normal duties, and in the past we have addressed it, but we aren't going out and actively identifying the problems or going back through neighborhoods and actively signing or posting for boundaries like we would do in new subdivisions. I actually anticipate the biggest issue is going to become with people saying, why did you just plop a sign in my yard? Now I have to mow around it. It's not terribly pretty. You know, those types of issues. It's different than when they bought their house or moved into their house and we've changed that. And just the fact that it's changed will result in a certain level of resistance.
A possible outcome I could see if we don't do anything further would be if someone comes in with a permit for a fence or something, not realizing really where their property or where they'd be allowed, and they discover that they've been mowing much further, and now all the neighbors know. Then we'd get in a, what do we do about this?
And we have had that where people come in and as we're looking at the fence location, and they may not even realize it because they may not be the person who originally bought the house, and they move in and they want to put a new nice fence in, and they're planning they put it back there, and they find out, oh wait, I can't put my fence within 30, 40, 50 feet of what I thought was my, my property line or, with an easement. We have had that happen in the past.
Is this similar to what happened in Winrose a few years ago?
That was encroachment on parks.
Oh, you're right. Yeah.
That was
It is,
encroachment.
but the concept is similar. Most people when they move in, not you as council people, if you were to buy a new property, you know enough to pull a survey and look at it and those things. But most people in the general public, they just know that my property, they look at the mold lines and that's what they assume the property boundaries are. They don't usually think of easements as far as placement or use of their properties. And most times it's not an issue, but for purposes of encroaching on ponds and easements, that it does happen.
The biggest problem, I think, is around some of the ponds in town where they're supposed to have 30 feet where they're not mowing and they're mowing right up to the water. And then pretty soon there's a shed there, and then pretty soon there's the fire pit. And
Well, I guess my concern is if we don't do something now, when do we cross that threshold where we have to start doing something? And are we better off using our resources now to stop it from progressing worse, and maybe it won't, or we let it go and then it gets progressively worse, and now we're behind the 8 ball, and now we're really playing catch up and trying to stop things.
Well, that's an interesting thought. I think when we had talked about it before, the idea was you go after the obvious ones, but you're suggesting perhaps the inverse. You go after the ones where there's not an encroachment, set those posts, and at least you've kind of headed off that potential, and maybe you take your time on the ones where there's an obvious, so you don't, I don't know, be a different way to think about it.
what, even if it's a letter or putting something in the newspaper that if you're next to a pond, just maybe you should check where your buffers are and not mow and it's not legal to mow the buffers. So they could be aware that they may be doing something wrong.
Just a nice friendly education campaign.
Right.
Rich, I believe we did that down by Rowena Ponds, did we not?
I thought I remembered something quite a while, and
In terms of the education effort, a couple of weeks ago, we had an incident between 3 neighbors where 2 of the neighbors thought one of the neighbors was mowing too close to the edge of a drainage way, and they actually called the police. And in that case, I thought the education efforts that the city has done must
Something
be
worked.
showing, because 2 of the neighbors were trying to stop the other neighbor from mowing too close, and they actually called the police because of that.
Sounds like a
It turns out there was no
issue.
wetland or anything at all.
It's a good strategy.
because I don't know, I just look in my neighborhood, Kelly Glen, some of those lots have more wetland than they have upland for the house in
Yep.
the yard. So if people start encroaching, pretty soon, it could be,
Just do newsletters.
but just newsletter, information letters, every so often to,
How much time are we talking in?
I can bang them out fast.
You don't have to lie. To go out and do signs, how many are we talking? I mean,
Signs would be a big, big effort, not just the purchasing and the placement, but the discussions and the locating of property lines, because the irons might not be visible. Now you're talking surveyors to go out, so you know that you've got the right corners, you don't want to misplace them. Dealing with the property owners that disagree with you, it
So
could
maybe
be a
we
hornet's nest.
maybe we start with the letter and then maybe signs go up at the spots that are really bad.
You could, yeah, maybe, hopefully with some education, people will naturally take interest in at least some
Right.
pull back or avoid encroaching.
or if all it's gonna take in some of these neighborhoods where 3 or 4 are mowing all of it is one neighbor to realize that they can't mow that anymore and to stop. And because they stopped, everybody else is probably not gonna be real happy, but they're gonna realize they're probably gonna have to stop too. Oh, there'll be enforcement action. I mean, the education part usually works pretty well.
So what I'm hearing from the council, there does not appear to be a strong desire to to aggressively and proactively go out through existing neighborhoods and place signage, but that there seems to be a stronger desire to invest some more time in education and continue on a as we become aware of it type basis of enforcement.
I think with that too, possibly we may have people asking the city, well, where is that line in my yard? And I think we have to be ready to be willing to try to help them know where that is.
I don't know, I just think we're better off potentially doing something before it gets bad. And you get a lot of these people that have been around a while that sell, and now you got new people moving. I don't know.
We've got that already in some neighborhoods where it's the third and fourth homeowner in that home that are around a pond that the encroachment is right up to it.
I think, wasn't it pointed out that Boulder Point or was it Boulder Heights that you were talking?
Boulder
It
Heights.
was in there, okay. But I mean, I see it all over in Boulder Point, and I would imagine a lot of those are first generation homeowners still, or maybe most of them, so. And
Well,
around
one thing we could do is take a little more time to identify the extent of the problem. We really were just looking for a sample to put in. We don't have a number of how many are actually even encroaching, to my knowledge.
Just anecdotally, we have the same observations that the council does. We have had some complaints over the years with regards to encroachments, usually called in by neighbors who know that, gee, everybody else's tall grass is to here, and that person's way down there. And in those cases, we've gone out. In most cases, it's a matter of talking with the property owner, making them aware of it. We've had truly one situation that I can recall over the years where we actually had to take it to the next level. But that also involved modifications of drainage structures and all kinds of other stuff along with that. But
So who's doing this? Who's responsible for following up on with property owners? Is this Rich's time? Is this Public Works time? Is this?
typically, it's a combination of Rich and Corey, depending on the circumstances of the situation, where it is in the process. It could involve me or Renee, depending on it. But typically, what we do is if we become aware of it, we usually try and contact the property owner, go out and meet with them. If that doesn't work right away, then we'll start more formal documentation, notices of violation, those types of things, to make them aware of it. And typically, usually a discussion has been effective, but like I said, there's one case I can think of where we actually had to do multiple visits, multiple letters, and actually step it up quite a bit.
And maybe I'm underappreciating the issue here. Spending money to have our engineering firm do this sort of work to me doesn't feel like a good use of resources. I think city staff has better things that they could be doing, but again, maybe I'm underappreciating this issue.
Is this something that we could look for possibly next year, getting an intern that's going into DNR work or something to help with?
Well, it doesn't necessarily have
Well,
to be, but this is the type of project where Rich had suggested we could investigate and do more investigation on where it's happening and things like that. That's the type of work that you typically have an intern do. Because it's time consuming. And that would be the most cost-effective way of addressing it.
And I know we've built some good relationships with the Humphrey Institute and several other colleges for interns, and this seems to be a good place to try to use something like that to get something done at a reasonable cost.
The reality is, for your staff that have been involved in code enforcement, we just know that typically by the time code enforcement tends to be very resource and time consuming. And when you're dealing with, and if you're going to do less than just the one-offs, if you're going to do a more comprehensive effort, the potential for the resource requirements to explode related to that potential exists. So we just want to make sure that if that's a route the council wants to go down, that could demand a significant amount of resources or not, but the potential does exist. And it's the portion that Rich is talking about. It's the human interaction part of it. It's the responding to the questions and talking to the homeowners and doing the education part of it. the cost will be in the survey and the materials and that, but that's gonna be fixed. It's the human part of it.
I would just say let's move forward and worry about the new developments and make sure those are, but you know, you tell me if I'm missing something. If this is a much bigger problem than I'm seeing it as.
See, I think we should, and I know it'll take time, but if there's a way we could have a number of, what are we looking at as far as broad spectrum, as far as how many? Is it rampant? Is it something that a newsletter or
When's our next
education-
water thing?
I'll be honest, I don't think it's rampant based on the work that we did and the feedback from Rich and Renee when they were looking for examples. I don't believe that letters or education will change existing conditions. While it might help educate against proliferation of it, and it might educate other members of the public to make calls on people who are starting to violate, but I don't think education is going to reverse anything that exists today.
I think one thing we could do that really wouldn't cost the city anything is put it on our next engineering agenda, bring our GIS staff in. We captured possibly a lot of this with our recent drone flights. And maybe you can draw a polyline pretty quickly around the current mow lines and just compare them every couple of years and see if things change and monitor it that way. Or maybe there's other automated type things that can be done to try and nail this down. That'd be worth talking about.
So I'm hearing quite a range of
You are.
of desires. So we're just looking for direction. The current approach is what Joe is suggesting, that we're just going to respond stuff on a basically complaint or egregious violation basis, and then we're going to try and make sure everything new that comes in is well signed.
Well, obviously, it must be somewhat of a concern, otherwise we never would have looked into it, correct? So we need to do something.
Is what Kate said true?
The questions come up with some of the violations that we've had. We know that there have been some elements, that there have been some violations. But when we've talked about it from a staff standpoint, digging into it too far, quite honestly, has been limited by the available bandwidth we had at the time and what we think might be the resource demands to actually pursue it aggressively. So we've kind of held off. If you recall, it came up as part of a discussion when Rich was actually giving his annual SWIP presentation, and the council asked to get more information on it. So that's really what this is. We're not making any sort of recommendation, but providing you with more information on the topic as you've requested.
I think we should just proceed as we have been.
I think we should look into it just to the point where we know how big a problem it is. And report back. Then we can decide then where we want to go. If it's just education, if it's, or if it's something else we need to do.
I agree
I'm
with
happy to
that.
take Noah around town and walk around the ponds and check it out too, and mark up a map. I'll be that guy walking in people's
You're going to be
backyards.
doing this on a computer. You wouldn't see it in the field. You wouldn't know where the easement lines are without something out there to go by. That's the issue.
Take your computer and use the GIS.
I like the idea
GIS.
of what Mayor Bob said. Find out just how severe we're talking. Is that going to take a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of finance to do that?
If there's some automated ways to do it, maybe not. If you have to look at every parcel and bring in an
Well-
easement map, that's big.
Well, that's where you will come back and let us know what we can, you do as much as you can for as cheap as you can. And let us know if it's going to cost a lot to really look into it.
We could do the same thing we did for the areas that we looked at and just expand it out to additional neighborhoods.
There's 60 ponds and I don't even know how many wetlands, so it's not an afternoon's work, I don't think.
I'm outvoted. That's fine with me.
Do you have your direction then, pretty much?
Could
or-
you summarize it for me, Mr.
Well,
Mayor?
you're going to look into it and see how extensive the plan is. I mean, the problem is without, if it's going to cost a lot to do it, that's something you're going to report to us before you're going to spend an excessive amount of time on it.
Okay, so use our best judgment to see if we can assess the the
Right.
degree of the
Problem.
potential problem and then report that back. And if it's going to be, in our opinion, overly resource intensive to just investigate it, report that as well.
Yeah, and then we go along with what Joe said, and we just kind of leave it till there's a time when we can either afford it or people are going to report on each other because they're so eco-conscious.
Well, what are the, I mean, and maybe we'll gather more of that too, if we see how big of a problem or not a problem it is, you know, what environmental impact there may or may not be from it, and then, I mean, maybe it's not a big deal. I'm talking about nothing here, but, and because we're an MS4 thing, the county doesn't have a say or part in any of this.
It's really, the buffer requirement is a city requirement, although they're certainly recommended by anybody you would talk to.
Well, do you have enough then?
I believe we have clear direction.
Clear as thick mud. Oh, anything else, Rich?
The next item is the ad. Rich wanted to give the council an update on any new information, changes, feedback from the Streets Expo related to the 2019 Streets Rehabilitation Project.
And before you get, I mean, I think look in 103F, because I think there is a place where we can get financial assistance to establish or other water resource protection measures. I think there could be ways that the city could get this funded. Whether it's through the state or the county gets money filtered to them, to us, to be able to engage in some of this stuff.
And I think it's something we may even be able to get help from Green Step Cities for different, because they have different programs for the different things. So, I mean, there's lots of ways to look into it to get help, so.
Moving on to pavements.
Buffers to pavement.
Should be our town motto.
So what this is about is basically what's happened since our meeting 2 weeks ago when I first updated you on pavement management. So since then, we've had the Streets Expo. At that, we see that there's a need to provide more background on our maintenance regimen, especially the idea of crack seal versus and overlay versus chip seal approach. We think you should consider worst first in lieu of the measure that, or the method that we did use, which is more of a balanced approach based on when we would predict failure, the functional class of the road itself, and then trying to keep the assessments uniform. Those are important things, and I'll talk more about that. And then the other thing, probably a need to better explain why now. It seemed like some people didn't think the streets needed anything. And so we want to explain why we're suggesting this. And then the other thing that's happened since then, we had a meeting with the county and our team to kick off the pre-design or the preliminary design phase of the roundabout. And that brought up staging, and that could have an impact on the pavement management. So we'll touch on that. So what your street maintenance regimen is all about is that blue line. On this chart on the left side, pavement condition, you can see for yourself at the bottom very poor, as it goes up very good. When the pavement's brand new, it starts very good at T = 0 on the bottom axis. This says accumulated axle loads. It could just as well say time. As time goes by on most streets, it experiences more axle loads. Streets, flexible pavements are designed to accommodate a certain number of equivalent single axle loads over its lifetime based on the soils and the mix of traffic. And so you can substitute time or axle loads on the bottom. Basically, the longer it goes, the worse the condition gets. I've very crudely imposed 2 additional lines on that chart. The brownish looking one, if you go to where the arrow meets at the 40% condition drop, that brown line actually goes straight up and then starts to go back down. So if you do an overlay about at the point where you have a 40% condition drop, the condition of the road pops back up to very good and then resumes deteriorating in some fashion similar to what the original. But what you notice at the bottom when it hits the very poor condition, you're further out in time. My feeling about the magenta line, the purple one, is when you do a seal coat at that same period, you might get a slight quality increase. It looks better.
It buys you time.
Not really.
But it buys you time to do the more major repair, potentially, because, I mean,
We'll go into that.
right, but not a lot of time. I mean, so I would,
What I'm saying it does, by this chart, it looks better, it get a slight improvement, but it doesn't, it deteriorates because it doesn't fix anything. So that time to very poor condition doesn't move out, or moves out very little. That's the theory that we're operating under. We'll come back to this. So our current maintenance regimen, we have two primary strategies to extend the remaining service life. Number one, we route and seal cracks. And this is important because cracks develop whether you have a car on it or not because of shrinkage. So you get shrinkage cracks on average about every 30 feet. Those cracks provide a direct conduit for rainwater to get into the base that holds up the pavement. So you get a zone under that crack, depending how much it's raining and how long, this big of basically mud. Cars hitting that mud are going to make that crack fail and get bigger and wider very quickly. So by sealing it, we prevent that happening and that premature development of potholes every 30 feet. The other thing we do, and we've been talking about, is this overlay prior to that 40% reduction in pavement condition indexes, PCI. We haven't done that yet, but that's in our plan. So the decision to go with this maintenance regimen was based on a few things. Number one, back when we first set out to figure out how we're going to take care of pavements after the cities merged, I got information from MAPA, from the executive director at that time. They had either compiled or did a study. I don't know where they got the information, but they had a chart that showed life cycle costs for various pavement maintenance approaches. One was the fill cracks and do an overlay. Another one was seal coating. I don't remember what the other ones were, but they were basically a bar chart. The shortest bar chart was the approach we're taking. They felt that was the most cost effective. Second, I have in all my years not seen any studies or credible evidence that seal coats extend that service life like we talked about in the previous chart. That doesn't mean it doesn't, but I haven't seen anything that shows it does. That also doesn't mean that a lot of cities, counties, and even the state highway department don't use seal coats. I can't say that they're doing right or wrong. I don't know why they've made that decision, but I haven't seen any studies that actually document here's what you can expect based on data. It's all assertions.
Now, MAPA is a group, an association of people that sell and install asphalt.
It's an association of paving contractors.
Right.
So it's
So-
one data source.
It's one,
But they are in competition with the Portland Cement Association and people like that. So they have to be somewhat scrutinized because they're examined more than a paving company by itself or others that put out this kind of stuff. So yes, I get that they could be biased, but they are pretty well scrutinized as well.
there isn't an association though that puts out studies. There's no seal coating studies.
yeah.
So that's probably why we don't get that. And
So
even our own county, I know, does seal coating.
I agree. Whether they should or not, that's not my business, but I haven't seen the studies that say, here's what you can expect from this type of regimen, from an extended life, based on data.
So which are the reasons to do seal coating that don't have anything to do with extending the life of
It looks nice, and it gives you better friction. That's in MnDOT's own pavement preservation manual. There's some language about sealing the surface, but no description of what that really means, what you're sealing against. It does also talk about overlays and clearly talks about overlays extending pavement life. So jumping back to this, based on the lack of studies or credible evidence, when you have to make a decision and you don't have the information, you have to fall back somewhat on judgment. So I can explain how I think about this. I mean, I've studied pavement design, done pavement design, taken some mechanics materials. You've heard me talk about the wire. If you take a piece of steel wire and you bend it, if you bend it far enough and often enough, it'll start to crack and eventually it'll break.
And the bending of the wire is equivalent to axle loads repeatedly
Is
over the
equivalent,
pavement.
basically when a car drives on a flexible pavement, it gives it a flex. It's designed for a certain number of flexes of a certain magnitude over time, and eventually the crack breaks through, the pavement fails, and you gotta do something with it. So the wire flexing, if you wanna make it stronger, you try two approaches. You can paint it and dip it in glitter. That's a lot like the seal coat. Or you can dip it in molten metal and add 30% to the radius. I think that the latter is going to make it stiffer. So that's how I view the crack filling versus overlaying, or I mean the seal coating versus overlaying. And so kind of these three factors is where we landed on the approach we've taken. In driving around with Corey today, he suggested, you know, put together some numbers, and so I did. Estimating what we currently spend and plan to spend and would expect to spend based on the data I've got up here. We spend about 15 grand a year on preventive pavement maintenance. That's sealing cracks and assessing distresses and monitoring that stuff. We expect at year 20 to spend just under $2.5 million on mill and overlay. Now we're going to do that spread out, but just for this exercise, we're imagining it's all at one time. We estimate, based on that program, we'll get 35 to 40 years of serviceability, and at that point we'll have to spend $7.2 million on a recon, which means grinding up the pavement, regrading it, compacting it, taking away the excess, and putting down a new layer of asphalt 3.5 to 4.5 inches thick. So then we want to calculate the equivalent uniform annual cost. You guys know I love that. We take our 15 grand we're spending. If all the pavements were finished yesterday in town, 21.5 miles, and we were going to say now we need to set aside money every year to keep this pavement forever, EUAC is what we'd be setting up. So we know we've got the 15 grand to fill cracks and look at it every year. We would need to save up $75,000 a year to pay for that $2.5 million mill and overlay at year 20. We would need to save up another $69,000 a year to do the recon at year 37.5. This is all using a 5% discount rate and annualizing these costs. So that's an annual cost you'd need to set aside to keep your streets of $159,000 based on today's program. If we did chip sealing, we'd still spend the $15,000 a year because you're going to seal those cracks and you're going to look at your pavement, so that's fixed. We would seal coat 4.3 miles a year because they say do them every 5 years. You can quibble about that, but that's a standard practice. That will cost you $90,000 a year. That number is based on bids received by the Burnsville Joint Powers Group that puts out bids for these types of street work, so it should be a valid number. And in fact, it's probably cheaper than most people actually pay. You would spend $0 on the mill and overlay at year 20 because you're doing seal coating instead. But it's my belief you would be looking at a recon at year 27.5, so 25 to 30 years instead of 35 to 40 because you're not strengthening that pavement. So you'd have that 7.2 million recon, but sooner. So now your EUAC is 15,000 plus 90 grand a year to chip seal, plus saving up $127,000 a year to rebuild the roadways at year 27.5. So your total annual money you'd need to save up is $232. That extra, what is it, 31, 41, and 70 grand
72,000.
is what, 4% tax increase per year forever, just on those differences. Even if you can change the frequency of things, and even if I'm wrong, it's gonna be very hard to make those numbers compete or flip especially.
Just looking at the numbers, Rich, it appears that you would have to have incredibly optimistic assumptions related to how much, what chip seal would be able to do to be able to even make it break even.
Yep. However, option 2 would make everything look nice,
And
because you'd be painting your pavement every 5 years.
But I assume that these assumptions are, or maybe they are. Does this reference the fact that our roads go like this and we have to fix a bunch of roads because they're gonna be in that 15 to 20 year whatever range versus being spread out equally across the board where you can kind of plan it?
So just to simplify things, I just assumed in both cases, we finished all the roads yesterday, that's paid for. We're looking forward now. What do we need to save up to keep them that way in both cases? There may be some variability in timing because of things, but I mean, significantly, the numbers aren't going to change much because you have the situation in both cases.
This exercise was really intended to answer the question about why don't we chip seal and why don't we chip seal? And what it comes back to is philosophy that we, based on the research Rich has done, his judgment, reasonable assumptions related to UAC, related to the long-term costs of it, this is a more effective, lower cost option for maintaining the roads. The reality, though, is that the roads, I mean, anytime you do routing and crack sealing, you get that, the street looks scarred. You have all of that. So our streets, and Rich has been honest with past councils, I've been at those meetings, that your streets may not look as pretty over that time period, but you're probably going to spend less in total over that same time period.
Well, and I guess, like when we talked on the phone or whatever it was the other day, I mean, I got no problem with what the decision is to chip seal or mill and overlay. I trust you, you're the expert. I mean, I'm not a road person. I think the questions for me aren't about this. I trust your expert opinion, suggestions, direction to us. It's more of the questions of that we're kind of getting to with which roads do we pick, how do we get to that, those assumptions. Those are, I mean, this one, I mean, I trust the experts in the room that I'm not.
I think the temptation, at least as far as cost, is to compare this 2.48 million to 4 times 90,000. I mean, those are different numbers quite a bit, but 90,000 is every year. 2.4 million is once in 20 years. That's the thing that's got to be kept in mind.
So 90,000 a year to chip seal every 5 years, and then
Yep.
15,000 per year on preventative maintenance.
You're still going to fill the cracks.
So that's still going in, around and filling the cracks.
Yep.
And then the crack seal that was talked about on the other page,
It's
that's,
the same thing. The cracks will be there whether you chip seal or not.
and you said there's no real evidence that that extends the life of roads, correct?
Not that I've seen.
But we're not sure why other cities or municipalities choose to do that.
It's
step.
cheaper. It makes
I'd
the
be
current
guessing.
residents happy. It looks pretty.
Yeah.
Well, and that
I mean, I have an opinion that it's just a feel-good solution that maybe hasn't been very rigorously analyzed, but I really don't know. I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing it because it looks nice if that's what you want to pay for.
that just makes me a little nervous. I mean, you're probably right. It's probably a cosmetic thing. It's probably has something to do with cost savings. I just have a tough time getting my head around the fact that a lot of other municipalities
Yep.
would make a conscious decision to do something that there's no evidence that it's
Yeah.
actually going to.
Well, you
But I
heard
guess
Corey,
We're hearing about more cities that are moving away from doing it for the city. So-
Minnetonka especially.
I think of all the times we kick the can. I mean, it's a way where we don't want to raise taxes. We don't want to. I mean, it's a very easy, logical. I mean, I
Yeah.
can totally see people getting in the habit of it, especially after you
But
get.
we're all smart, presumably. We're all smart people. We want to make the best decisions in the interest of the city. I'm going to go on the leap of faith and say so are other municipalities. And again, if there's no evidence that what they're doing actually works, what are we missing?
Well,
It seems too convenient to say it's just cosmetic and cost effective, but maybe that is the
I
case.
would suggest, just out of curiosity, to ask the county why they chip seal.
Yeah.
County Road Department, find out what's their,
What's their argument?
yeah,
Yeah.
what benefit do they see?
Mhm.
Because I know when they put in the new road just on the other side, the roundabout and all that, almost immediately after they got done, they chip sealed it.
And it's not that I question you,
Yep.
Rich, it's
No.
just I think we,
So, and there is a, I mean, besides aesthetics, there's a benefit if you have a road that's gotten polished and smooth, you want to restore some friction for better stopping and stuff like that. Seal coat does that.
Well, I did ask Tom Wolf about it, why they chip sealed a brand new road, and he said they were told that the chip sealing on the brand new road would extend the life.
That's the current thinking in the chip seal industry, is that it should be done within the first 2 years.
you have an audience member with a question.
Sorry.
So I work for an engineering company, and I've done some research on this as well, and I would agree with Rich 100%. Existing roads, chip seal it doesn't do anything to preserve the life of the highway. The reason the county did it immediately after the new road is that is what chip sealing is for. Chip sealing is for taking a new road and keeping life of that road for as long as possible. It's a maintenance thing for brand new pavements. For you here, putting chip seal out on the roads you currently have does absolutely nothing, because the chip seal on the new road is to try to keep it from cracking and try to keep that surface, rather than, you can't fix cracking with chip seal. So the way that you're going right now, I would agree 100% with his numbers here. If you were looking at brand new pavement in the community and you applied this concept to brand new pavement, that's exactly what you'd have to have.
So wherever we put it, just seems like then when we do the mill and overlay, we should be chip sealing it right away to.
No, because you're doing mill and overlay on top of existing pavement that's still going to be underneath of it that's cracking. So
Yeah.
you're not going to.
But it's the new roads, the brand new roads that we would be considering it, I guess, whatever. Yeah.
MnDOT does doing studies on that at Monroe. It's less than 5 years old, so they're still, I mean, that study, so they don't have data that shows anything yet. But they also checked an old section, and it didn't do anything there. They couldn't detect the new asphalt more than a millimeter or so from the surface. So, yeah.
Well, I think for us right now, to start this, is probably a good idea. We're gonna see what, we've got a live experiment in our parking lot that was in really bad shape. If it doesn't look good, if it's starting to look just as bad as it did in another year or two, we're gonna know.
It is already, you can already see the underlying
When I came to the City Hall lot when things were damp this morning, I could see the alligator cracking through that chip seal.
The chip seal, from what Rich and John are saying, is when you build a brand new road, the belief is that the chip seal will keep the initial cracks from starting for a longer period of time, and you buy a little bit of time. But once the cracks are there, they're there, and you can't do anything about it. The chip seal's not going to do anything.
So let's talk about our parking lot. Our parking lot here at City Hall was chip seal.
Yes.
Recently.
Yep.
And the reason it was chip sealed is because it was free.
It was free.
Basically a thank you for letting us use your parking lot.
And so we're allowing our parking lot to be used basically rent-free.
Yep.
And this was just a,
So-
hey, thanks, we'll do this for you.
Yep.
Which company actually paid for the chip sealing then? Was it?
Pearson.
Yeah, but that's
They were a contractor to Scott County.
To Scott
for Scott County, okay.
So, in this, I don't want to go too far off the subject, but I'm curious, why have we been allowing them to use our parking lot for free?
Because it's for a county project. A contractor having ability to have centralized location of where they're storing their materials provides the county to get better pricing. It makes the project go faster and more efficiently, and so there's an indirect benefit to our residents, but it's also in the same scale philosophy of collaboration. We have the ability for them to do the work here without really any significant impact on ourselves. We've done that the last couple of years, and the contractor offered basically a free spiff of putting chip seal. We never would have chip sealed the parking lot, otherwise it doesn't make any sort of financial sense.
Would we have asked for money or rent or something? Or is this just
We-
because we want to be good neighbors with
We
the
want to be
county?
good neighbors. We haven't in the past.
And if we really don't believe in it, why don't we just say, no, that's just cosmetic, it's a waste of your resources, which is therefore a waste of county resources.
The parking lot looked terrible, and if they wanted to do it for free, and that made the parking lot look a little better for a few years until we do a full reclaim, it was free.
I'm just,
Yeah.
I'm challenging on it, Tom, because
Yep.
it feels really contradictory.
Yep.
I don't, to be honest, I don't think it does.
It does to me, because
It was-
if this is really a method that we don't think has any value, and
No,
someone
no,
somewhere is paying.
it does have value for cosmetic purposes, which is the pure reason why we accepted it here, because it improved the cosmetics of the parking lot. There's no detrimental aspect to it from that
But
standpoint.
someone's paying for it, and it's county tax dollars, right? If it's Pearson's, and Pearson's is obviously doing this on county benefit, then it's
So
county
as a
tax
fraction
dollars.
of their contract, because they had a contract that covered Scott County, City of Burnsville, all of the cities in this area pooled together for this annual contract to save money. And they got the chip sealing one. We didn't have any done in town,
Right.
but county roads and neighboring cities. So as a fraction of the total quantity, this was nothing to them. It's,
I mean,
It's like,
the reality is they indicated it's something they might provide, and we showed up on Monday morning and it was done. We didn't even know they were coming.
Yeah, but again, if we feel it's worthless, then if it's just purely cosmetic, then I don't even know why we're doing it, and it's still county tax dollars that paid for it, and
Well, I
that
don't
means
think,
county
I don't
officials
think it
feel
was
that.
included in their, I don't think that doing the crack sealing was included in their bid. That was something that was discussed after they arranged the location.
But at some point, county officials and
It's
other
just that
municipality
much
officials
less
felt that
extra
this
they
was
have to
that
haul away.
important to do that, so. And I'm taking us a little off topic, which wasn't the idea, but.
No, I guess I would disagree, Joe. I don't know that there was any downside to it. It's not something we would have done. It did improve the appearance of the parking lot for free, but it's not something we would have invested any dollars in. And it was for cosmetic purposes, so I don't know that it's contradictory in any way to our position with regards to how we do pavement management.
Yeah, well, I mean, we can agree to disagree, and again, this isn't what I'm trying to spend a lot of time arguing about. I really want to understand what other people know that we apparently don't. If other municipalities, someone else feels there's a lot of value to this, but yet we don't.
That's a reasonable question.
That's what I don't get. And this is, again, county tax dollars. It's paying
if any
for
of you
some
learn
this.
something, bring it to me, because
That-
I'd
that's
like
what-
to see it.
That's why I
I'm not
suggest
doubting you either.
that's why I suggest we check with the county
And I would
and
agree
find
with
out what their findings are on the chip sealing, and if they've got information from their roads, then we can use that.
I would agree with that.
Would you like me to push through the rest of this very quickly?
Yeah, you're over your time limit.
We'd argue our approach is consistent with COG, the community involvement, that was what Monday night was about. And problem solving, I mean, technology, resourcing the best solutions, long-term costs, planning to minimize taxpayer burden, we're trying to do that. I perfectly happy to come every year and do a bunch of seal coating and have a guy stand there for 3 days watching it, but I just don't think it's in your best interest, so.
Do we need somebody watching them when we seal coat?
Well, someone's got to take the ticket, so you're not getting overcharged for the quantities, making sure the applicators are working properly, so you don't end up with clumps all over. I mean, it's not you inspect your own house painter and he does it. So it's like anything else. There can be quality problems and quantity problems that you want to monitor. I wouldn't recommend just having them come to town and send you a bill. That's a sure way to overpay. Our project selection. Currently, it's based on the condition and the function of the road. So our thinking was that deterioration would be more rapid on the higher traffic roads where there's minor collectors and collectors. I talked about this 2 weeks ago. We also think users of through roads would expect a little bit higher standards. They'd be less tolerant of a lot of bumps on the through roads. And we are also importantly seeking to keep the assessments from next year's project fairly consistent with the project that would happen 2 years after that. So you're not at $600 in 2019 and $1,000 in 2021, whipsawing like that. It can lead to some discontentment in the residents. The alternate approach would be a worst first, where you're just basically purely based on score. And that's pretty common. I mean, it's a natural instinct. You do your worst streets first. If we did make that change, we'd be adding several local road segments and probably delaying work on minor collectors if we wanted to keep the same size project. It wouldn't be a huge swing. We'd take 2 minor collector segments out and add several local roads. But you're adding then streets where there's more payers, and so you'd have to pay attention to that resulting assessment and think about what's going to happen when you're doing a bunch of collector roads where there's fewer payers in future projects, and is there an adjustment for that? So you start getting into legal questions about setting up the assessment on okay, it's $600 this year, from now on we're going to use that plus inflation or something like that. Cities do that for various assessment things. Whether that's defensible or not, that's a legal opinion. We haven't gone into that yet, but you get into questions like that, switching to a worst first. I'm not opposed to it. It's certainly understandable by everybody.
Isn't it true once we get to 5,000, we're going to get somewhere between $150,000 and $200,000 per year from state aid for local streets, because we'll be over 5,000.
We would not be able to spend that off of the designated
It would be on for the
roadway.
major collectors and.
Right. There's a maintenance and a capital item, and you can choose how to get a portion of that, but it's not going to help your local roads, which is most of your mileage, over half. So.
But if it's used on the others, that would offset some of that cost.
We're already not assessing the cost for major, we're not including the cost for major collectors in the calculation. We will assess people with a driveway, but we'll base it on the same assessment that others are paying, so it's fair. So I'm going to jump back now to this graph, which also covers why now. We are not trying to fix a road that looks terrible and rides terrible. We're trying to keep it from getting that way as long as we can. So we're trying to hit it in this kind of this 40% or less area before that curve gets even steeper and it deteriorates even faster.
Which is counterintuitive, or
It's-
counter to the.
Why are you
arguments of why
assessing
fix
me? The road looks just fine.
Right.
Well, yes, that's the problem, and that makes
The
this a
challenge.
harder one.
Yeah.
Yep. Jump to the other item that came up, which is staging, and with a little thought, you'll probably have already figured this out. We have to decide at some point, are we going to build this roundabout with that interchange closed, or with it allowing traffic? At least two-way, or one lane each way. Building it under traffic makes it take longer, cost more, and might hurt quality a little bit. But closing it causes a whole host of other problems. You've got a downtown that's now going to be isolated unless you go to some great lengths to try and bring traffic there, which is very difficult using signs. You may also route traffic inadvertently to Aaron Drive, Glenboro, and maybe some others, which causes possibly pavement damage, depending on the numbers and the loadings, but for sure a perception problem with your residents. We don't have answers for this today. I just want to let you know we are thinking about this, and before we finalize that feasibility, I think we should have some thoughts on, do we hold off on some of these key ones? Do we do them early? Do we have a plan for doing them again? I don't know what the answer will be.
Well, and I think when we get to those, I mean, the one thing I wrote down, can we use it to our advantage to make the county kick in, because we're diverting traffic off of their roads onto a city road, and could they help fix the road that we are now driving on in ours?
I'm guessing, I have a pretty good idea of their response would be, there are available county roads for detour. We cannot control people choosing to go on local roads as a shortcut. But there's, so there's several things to think about. I think there'll be a lot of thought going on about how can we possibly do this under traffic. It's going to be, I think, pretty difficult to close without some consequences.
So that'll be part of it, one of the policy decisions. There's going to be an analysis, which will come up with some estimates of what is it goes to time, what is it going to be for additional costs. We'll try and have a better discussion about what potential impacts are so the council can make those kinds of decisions.
So you can see this is all a big topic, despite it just being a boring old bunch of roadways out there. I tried to keep it short, but
I just want to add, I think you did a really good job the other night, and I think it was probably I mean, anytime you go into a room full of people that are potentially facing assessments, it's not exactly the most welcoming situation. So you did a good job, and I think going forward as we do more of these, I think Corey also did an excellent job of kind of bridging the gap to layman's terms, laymen such as myself, who don't always understand what you're saying. So,
One thing I'll say that helped me the most tonight is when you went to the cost benefit. I mean, you've done that before, and that really, that sets the tone for the whole.
there's some, when you're comparing alternatives with different lives and different costs in the life cycle, there's only one way to compare them, and that's by going to that annual or present worth or something where you're making it apples to apples.
What it's going to cost over the full 20 years or whatever, 30. It made it per year, then it made it a lot clearer. So thanks.
That was Corey's idea, by the way.
Well, you've done it before.
Well,
Why
not
didn't
the
you do it?
EWA, not the equivalent from annual cost part, but he said, bring them costs. Look up, we know what seal coat costs.
I like that part. So thanks.
I have a question for council. Do you have any feedback or thoughts or how much time, I mean, with regards to the balanced versus the worst first approach, given the explanations that Rich has given on a couple of times?
I mean, I absolutely support the balanced approach. I mean, to me, it just makes more logical sense. Maybe it's just the way I think about it. I get the perception of why wouldn't we fix the worst roads first. I get that piece of it. But I think it's one of those decisions that with education, with the way we can explain it the best we can, and ultimately I'm going to make the best decision what I think is going to be anyway, regardless if I have a bunch of people pissed off or saying, no, you should have fixed the worst roads first.
If we were able to work out where we could keep the assessments kind of uniform, would that change your, I think it's possible to do worse first with that. It's just going to take some thinking about how to set up the assessments.
And I'm looking at worse first, but I'm also looking at doing the minor collectors because our minor collectors, they take more heavy traffic, than any others. Just the garbage trucks. We've got 3 garbage companies out here 3 times a week, and they're all running 2 trucks, and they're running up and down Aaron Drive 2 to 3 times a day.
So that would
those roads are built a little heavier, at least James Parkway and Windrose, for example, are built heavier. I haven't checked Aaron Drive, but it probably is as well. It should be. If
it should have been, but I don't believe it's.
Aaron
Drive's had a lot of problems over there.
But I think that's a reasonable question, Rich, because you look at the flexing, the minor collectors are going to have a higher number of flexing, so even if it's built more robust or it's in better condition now, is it reasonable to expect that it might fail quicker?
Mm-hmm. Well,
So that curve will drop off sooner?
Especially with everything I've seen in every regional council mayors or anything else, garbage trucks are the worst thing for city streets.
They give it a bigger hit, there's no doubt, but they were also designed for that to a certain extent. So.
I mean, in my mind, I think the biggest thing we need to be prepared for or to justify is why we're choosing which roads. I mean, and if we can justify that and back that up, I mean, whichever method you go, where's the whatever.
Well, that's good to know. I mean, we can think about and talk about that more to make sure that we feel we've got solid ground for what we're recommending.
And I think maybe a combination approach, the worst roads that are local streets and the worst that are minor collectors?
Kind of there, but there, I mean, you certainly got local roads with lower scores than a couple of the minor collectors.
Well, and I think being able to explain, we're doing this road now because we're doing the road right next to it or the segment right next to it too, which makes logical financial sense to do it together with this one, so it may not be as bad, but this is why we're doing it, and being able to explain that why piece.
Okay.
Especially since everybody seems to use the local collectors and
Well, they
and
do,
the minor
yeah.
collectors.
The reality is we're looking at reconstructing it all within a shorter time frame. So a lot of this is moving when you're constructing it forward or back 3.
We may have a bigger problem 3 projects out when we're trying to, why are you doing this road that looks like it's brand new? Well, because we don't want to, do it. So, we'll take that under advisement.
Any other discussion? Thank you, Rich. Community development? Parks, any questions on the parks? Other committee and board reports. Scale is tomorrow. MBTA is until the end of the month now. I-35 Solutions?
That was this morning. I had it on my calendar for next week, so I screwed that one up. I'll be there next month. It's only like 1.5 miles from my work too, as I was sitting there.
MnDOT rep was going to be new today, so they're changing. Chamber of Commerce, any chamber news?
Do we need to continue having chamber on here?
Well, we were going to keep it in case they showed up, but we can just
It
go
does-
by it.
It doesn't sound, I mean, I was at the chamber board meeting, no one's gonna be showing up.
Are we
There's
gonna,
only
happened
4
to that?
people at
Are
the
we
chamber
gonna-
board meeting.
are we gonna be going there and either council or staff or providing reports?
Can we
there?
document this somehow then? Because in a year when we get the letter that says we're not participating with the chamber, I mean, it's the same cyclical thing that happened last year, that happened 2 years before that. It's just frustrating. I mean, there was this big hoo-ha about the lack of communication and collaboration. It's just frustrating.
I hadn't been to a chamber board meeting in 6 months. I don't know, do you two know?
We don't get
Well,
invited.
it's very sporadic.
Okay.
When we invited it, last fall we started attending and they said, we want you to come every month. And then they decided.
Then it was, well, we don't want you to come, and so we're at the point where we call them every month and say, do you want us to come? And we're told, no, that's okay, we got other stuff we're doing. So,
Does someone want to check, I mean, I'd be happy to as well, but I mean, someone want to connect with Don or the chambers every 4 months, every 3 months? I mean, what works? So I do feel like if we keep having this on here and there's no updates, like Josh said, it's, what are we doing? Are we spinning our wheels a little bit?
Well,
I think it's good to have the documentation on here that we want to hear about it and we want to do it. If there isn't going to be the updates, at least it's not us making the time and the
yeah,
opportunity.
we're leaving it open for them to come to us.
or we'd be very happy to go there.
Oh, yeah. But I mean, we're leaving them on our agenda. They have an agenda spot where if they want to come and talk to us.
Or for when we visit them, then there's time for you to tell about the board meeting. You know, what you found out.
So how was the meeting?
It was good. Hey, there wasn't a, I mean, I gave some of the development updates that he had provided me and well received, and I mean, the candidate form they had put on, and they had great attendance. I think they counted 140 people were in attendance, which was crazy. I mean, that was a big number.
Was there anything that the board discussed that they're looking for, would like from the city, or would like from city staff?
No. I mean, it was a pretty light. Like I said, Don has been away for some other items, and I mean, there was maybe, I think, actually 5 chamber members there. So, I mean, it was a small deal, so
Rick
not a lot of
Lupert-
discussion.
Rick Lupert doesn't go anymore because he went back to work full time.
Right, yeah.
So,
Can I, sorry, go back to the planning commission? or the community development piece. I mean, do we have a timeline on when some of those draft amendments to the zoning ordinances and that kind of stuff's gonna, I mean, I saw that you got the public hearing thing.
I'm hoping that 2 of them will be on the next agenda. We have to have them posted on the city's the draft ordinances concerning the amendments posted on the city's website 10 days ahead of time. So one of them went up today. That was actually an ordinance just rezoning the Dakota Acres property. The next one concerning changes to the B1 zoning district and making that easier, simplifying some of that language. That will probably be done tomorrow. And then what I do is I have Andrea review the draft ordinances before they go on the city's website. So hopefully that one will also be on your next agenda. And then changing the residential lot sizes. That needs to go before the planning commission for public hearing. So in the next couple of months, 2 months.
On a similar vein, what's the timeline for appointing another planning commission?
I have spoken with the next applicant. That was the choice of the committee, and she is interested in serving in that capacity. So,
Are they going to be is she going to re-interview this candidate, or is it?
Is the third one the other person out of the 2 interested? So, or is just one out of the 2?
I only contacted Kate while we're having this conversation. But, and my recollection of the direction from Steve and Kate was just to offer it to the next choice candidate.
But I think we decided at a council
The
meeting.
council direction on that was that the committee would interview the second
I don't
and
think
third
you were
place
here.
candidates, and that Brad would serve as the new panelist on that, and if Brad was unavailable, Brad would appoint another commissioner to serve in his stead.
I don't know that she was present for that meeting.
I did see that, or that was in the minutes from this.
I have spoken with just the one, Melissa. And it did not, I told her I'd be following up with her as to whether there'd be another interview.
Okay.
So she's interested in this one.
So the timeline's still kind of undefined at this point. Okay.
So you still have to speak to the other person and see if they're still willing to do it. Okay. Downtown improvement,
Didn't meet
didn't meet.
RCM and CCEC.
I don't see CCEC here.
It's right above downtown improvement. Right below regional council, man.
Oh, yeah. Right in between. That's because I already checked it off. Because I looked at Sandy and I was ready for.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah. Threw my whole train of thought off. Derailed me. Okay, CCEC?
I have not, and we meet next Tuesday.
Okay. Downtown. 50 by 30, steering committee met. They're just planning for the big group meeting again. Transportation committee met. Well, we didn't meet. I canceled the meeting because we're ready for the big group meeting, and the two items we're pushing is the Dan Patch corridor and getting the gag order removed, so we can talk about that. And the other one is trying to set up a county-wide auto repair program through Fish, with Fish being the facilitator. I found out today, because I went to the Fish annual meeting, that Fish considers itself almost the faith-based part extension of Scale. Because most of the people that are leading, or a lot of the people that are leading Fish
It's pretty much all true.
came from Scale, so it's the faith-based part of Scale, so it was an interesting meeting and a lot of good networking there.
Did you stay for the whole 7
I
hours?
stayed till almost 2 o'clock. But, and the only reason I stayed is because I stayed until the people I was sitting with left, because I was sitting with Janet Williams, John Ulrich, Brad Tapke. So there was people that were important to the county there.
They're all important to the county, Bob.
Well, Brad, I defer to Brad because I think he'll probably win the election for state representative from this Shakopee area.
Bob, I'm just being a smart ass.
I know. That's, people have been around a while. So it was, but it was a good meeting. It was interesting. And you can talk about housing.
All right. Same deal as, same update as you had for the steering committee. I mean, it's just getting ready for the October 23rd event, and yeah.
And I didn't
I'm
stay
super
for the
eager.
workforce housing because I had another meeting.
Isn't that what's on scale? Is it workforce housing presentation?
Workforce committee, or the workforce committee, yeah.
Yeah.
It's housing committee and then workforce. Workforce is, housing meets and then workforce meets a half hour later.
Isn't the workforce presentation at scale?
Yeah, it'll be at this, I didn't stay for their, being on the steering committee, I didn't stay for the workforce, like I usually stay for all the subcommittees, because they recommend that if you're on the steering committee, you know what's going on in the other committees, even though very few people do it.
If it's okay with council, I've got stuff to do in the office. Is it okay if I miss scale tomorrow?
Absolutely not.
Okay, I'll be there right at 7:30.
Do what you gotta do.
You've got permission if you've got something more important to do to miss scale anytime you want. Because your job here is probably more important than your presence at scale. Because we're covered at scale.
Well, I think we got that locked down pretty good.
Any other discussion by council this evening?
I'll motion to adjourn.
All in favor? Aye. We are adjourned.